My guest today is Lamarre Edouard. Lamarre is a therapist in private practice in San Diego, specializing in the intersectionality of BIPOC and LGBTQ and so much more. Of course, we will have his full bio in the show notes. Welcome to the LMTQ podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the LMTQ podcast. Lamarre, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, TJ. I appreciate it. Yeah, happy to be here and happy to be able to join the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And as we talked about in the green room, which is basically us just chatting before the show starts, we were talking about how we can create a space or help members of LGBTQ community do some deeper healing. So I'm just curious right out of the gate, if there's anything you're willing to share out of your own journey and your practice with clients. What do you think the call right now to deeper healing within our community is?
I think some of the things that come to mind, like top of mind, is being able to practice that self-awareness and also that self-compassion. A lot of the work that I do with clients, especially with queer clients, is being able to make space for all parts of ourselves, being able to make space for the shame, make space for the questions, make space for the curiosity, and that things don't necessarily need to be shunned or even rejected. It's actually through that self-awareness that, oh, actually, I have some questions, and oh, I have some interests that I haven't actually given voice to or been able to even lean into. And it's actually through that self-awareness and exploration that I try to practice with clients and encourage them to even take with themselves and community. Yeah.
I love it. Oh my gosh, so much in what you said already is just singing my song, if you will. I really love the piece about being aware enough to ask some of these deeper questions and staying in the frequency of curiosity, right? How do we stay in that frequency? And then what's the relationship between that and shame? Because you brought shame up, and to me, it's like so pervasive in our community. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think those are both good questions. I think the first one, when it comes to how do we stay in that curiosity, I think of sometimes like thinking about how we were when we were our younger versions of ourselves and how interested we were in the world and wondering like, well, why does this happen the way it does? And well, actually, I want to go see this place. And so can we allow ourselves to get back to that space of curiosity where we were maybe with our younger self? And I think that also ties into shame too, because some of our younger versions or younger selves, we were probably shamed for even being curious. And so it takes time with being with maybe a therapist, being with community. And I find that in queer community, folks are so open-minded, so understanding for however folks want to show up, honestly. If it's like, hey, of course, people call each other in and make sure, you're not doing things that are microaggressive or doing things that are unintentionally offending someone. But being able to say like, yeah, it's okay that you think that way. Why do you really think that way? I think those are two thoughts that come along with when it comes to like leading with that curiosity and trying to stay in it, and also giving ourselves grace that we don't always have to be working towards something or growing, right? That it can be that we can be in a state of stability and homeostasis and allow our nervous system to even regulate without feeling like I need to grow, I need to learn more. And things happen in the time that they do. And I'm thinking more about that shame aspect, right? Of our younger version of ourselves experiencing shame, and then we learn, well, oftentimes shame originates from outside of us, right? That someone else shamed us and then taught us to learn to shame ourselves. And I think what I tend to do with clients is be able to have them take a look at shame in the framework of like it's a defensive behavior, right? Underneath shame is all of our core emotions, but shame comes in to criticize who we are as a person and label us, and takes away from that maybe core emotion that might have been guiding us in a direction.
Wow,
So
I
yeah.
love it because you're speaking to something that is so true for me, and it's kind of the foundation of my work in my conscious recovery model. And that is, we all come into the world curious, open, without
Hmm.
judgment, without like the ideas of us and them and good and bad and right and wrong. And in some
Yes.
ways, we need to be taught some of these things. And then in other
Yep.
ways, we end up absorbing the shame of the people around us. And I'm thinking about all the different layers in my own journey coming in and just remembering being so happy, so open, so curious about life. And then just,
Mm-hmm.
so much shame from the family system, so much. I mean, I remember watching TV and seeing war on TV. I remember
Hmm.
so many layers. And for me, one of the first layers being a little queer boy in Indiana in a time long,
Mm.
long ago was
Mm.
don't act like a girl, don't talk like a girl, don't walk like a girl. That was the original
Yeah.
message. And I remember thinking, my mind was like, what's wrong with being a girl? But I also really
Yeah.
took on shame. And that became an
Hmm.
identity, like you said, that was really masking some deeper feelings.
I'm glad that you can like even tie in like your own lived experience, your personal experience, and like no, like that's what it's been. That's the journey of what it's been like for you. I find for myself, coming from a Haitian family and coming from the Black community where um, there were a lot of influences that weren't necessarily encouraging Black men to explore their sexuality or to even have these questions around. What does it look like to exist outside of cis heteronormativity? And I found myself over time, and particularly going through my counseling program, really being in a space around other queer folks and then being able to start allowing myself to lean into that a little bit more and saying, you know what, if what's it like to first now admit that, yeah, I have these questions, and what's it like to now take the step of saying, okay, I think I'm going to allow myself to identify with queer, even if I'm not necessarily exploring my sexuality, but at least allow myself to say, I think with the questions and the way I'm feeling, this label feels right for me, and then later on being able to say, okay, well, what's it like to now go on dates? What's it like to now go see other people and tell other people about this? I really think also when it comes back to queerness is about community, right? That if we can surround ourselves with people who think like us, look like us, experience like us, then it really helps with normalizing our own personal experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and the layers of what you
Mm,
just shared, because there's religion, there's culture, there's
mm-hmm,
race,
mm-hmm.
there's
Yep.
identity. I mean, and all of those come together, and we have these different influences. And I know that you do have a focus on BIPOC and
Yeah.
LGBTQ plus and the
Yeah.
intersectionality, which is a really beautiful word that is used a lot now. So what does it actually mean, right? It
For
means
sure. Yeah.
come in not as a one-dimensional human, right? Like I'm not just a
Mm-hmm.
queer person, like I have
Mm-hmm.
this culture. I had a religion that might play.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I bring religion in is we know that is a source for a lot of queer folks for something that they get to work through, whether maybe
Yes.
not so lovingly in
Mm-hmm.
the beginning. But I'm curious if you could say more about that.
Yeah, and I agree with you that intersectionality, while holds so much value, it has also kind of become a buzzword that doesn't necessarily folks don't maybe know what does it really mean and how does it show up in practice, And I think the way that I tend to implement that into my practice with folks and even in my conversations with friends and community is that we take a look at all the aspects of what make us all the aspects that make us who we are,
Yeah.
whether it be racial, whether it be ethnic, geographic, whether it be gender identity, sexual identity, all of these different parts to make space for the considerations. And it doesn't mean that, for example, with set clients, sometimes maybe we spend a whole session on just talking about one aspect. Doesn't mean we're done. There is more that we're going to kind of still loop into the mix. And I think another part too is even generationally, right? That sometimes when if I'm talking to clients from like older generations and then they experience the world in a different way and are now trying to adapt to it. And then I talk to younger clients where sometimes for my younger clients, they feel so overwhelmed by the fact that there's so much on the plate. It's like, I don't even know which one to tap into. And it's like, start with one and then we can see where we go next. And I find for myself, I have a passion in working with BIPOC and queer folks. Those are, I would maybe not my bread and butter, but like that's where I really feel comfortable comfortable and confident in the things that I'm saying. One, because I identify with both communities, but also like through the work history that I've had a lot of clients respond really well to my therapeutic style, and particularly its BIPOC and queer clients.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And it is true that the term intersectionality has become a buzzword. And then I love that
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, well, what does it actually mean? And it's going to mean
Mm-hmm.
something different to every single person on any given
Mm-hmm.
day, right?
Yep.
And when a lot of times what ends up happening, and I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are, but a lot of times we end up using all of these things to create an identity, but there's also something deeper. And it's this very interesting balance of honoring the identity and the different cultures that we have grown up in and the different experiences we've had, and then also the deeper healing that is involved. And I hope you understand what I mean by that, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Could you explain a little bit more? Could you expand on it just a second, just so I can kind of like make sure I have my like
Yeah,
understanding?
yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
so as a young man, I'll just give
Mm-hmm.
a few examples. I love being transparent as possible. And
Yeah.
one of the things I grappled with are issues of race growing up in India,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
a time long ago, and
Yeah.
absolutely loving my grandfather, and absolutely
Mm-hmm.
being like shocked by the overt racism that came out of his mouth, right? Because our
Mm-hmm.
generation was like, no, we're rebelling against that. But I also absorbed some of that. And so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
took on
Mm-hmm.
this identity as being like a crusader for equality. But then
Yes.
the deeper healing that I got to go through later, where I'm like, yeah, but I also loved that man. And what did
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
create? And how do I
Yeah.
the world and how do I question my lens so that I
Mm-hmm.
can start to create a different reality, not only for myself, but for the clients I work with, very important,
Yeah.
also humanity itself.
For sure, yeah. It's like being able to recognize the biases and where those biases might have originated, and holding the complexity of our mixed emotions, right? Well, we can love our grandparents, we can love our parents, we can love even our friends, and still be able to hold that critical lens for family and people in our lives, as well as for ourselves, being able to take a look at, wait, and that does tie into like queer folks too, where sometimes folks, as they're exploring their sexuality or exploring like where they feel most comfortable, maybe what identity feels most comfortable for them, being able to take a critical lens to wait, how have I been prescribing to heteronormativity? How have I been enforcing gender roles or gender labels on other people? And then not to even leave out the fact of non-binary communities, right? And trans communities, of saying like, how have I been expecting or forcing, or imposing on other people to fit into these defined boxes that are at the core of them all colonial tools to restrict people, restrict communities, to say you can't really be your full self. You have to now choose between being this or this. And so being able to like really take that critical lens and like, to our biases, and know what is the function of that bias? Do I
Hmm.
still even agree with it? Is
Right.
it a value that I hold for myself, or is that contrary to how I've actually been trying to walk the path in life that I'm trying to walk? And I think the thing that we haven't touched on yet in our conversation is about the consistency and discipline to say like, no, these are my values. These are aspects that I hold core to my integrity. And now what does it look like to maintain that integrity? Yeah.
Yeah, and how do we create a safe enough place to even start to explore it? And I think that's
Yeah.
really the essence of support groups. That's the essence of treatment. That's the essence of
Mm-hmm.
therapy, is to have a safe
Mm-hmm.
place where I can start to say, what did I absorb that's not even mine? And what do I truly
Yes.
value? And I mean, my gosh, I think about all the layers. I think about within the LGBTQ plus community.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just give an example. So like
Yeah.
friend of mine, I asked her to speak at a conference. The long and short of it is someone said, well, why would she be speaking at an LGBT
Mm.
plus conference? And I
Mm.
wanted to lean in and say, well, first of all, if she's an ally, isn't there a place? But she's actually bisexual. And it's something that
Yeah.
people overlook a lot. Like we could have a whole
Yeah.
show on the overlooked letters within the alphabet soup, if you will.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's an
No,
interesting one.
definitely.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. That folks always get overlooked, and how minimizing to people's experience that ends up being, or even like leads to people further questioning themselves. I've talked to several clients about like the queer experience everybody has had within the queer experience, and I didn't know it before until I started exploring for myself. But am I queer enough? Am I queer enough to fit into this crowd? Do they actually want me here? And it's after having conversation with so many folks of like, oh, everybody has had that question at one point or another. And it's like, so then it's kind of like, if we're trying to say, am I doing the queer experience right? If you're having that question, you're doing it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what's true for me doesn't necessarily need to be what I'm projecting the group is wanting me to do, because usually it's not
Yeah.
even necessarily happening, but there is a dynamic and we see it so entrenched in our culture right now. And this is where intersectionality becomes such a fascinating conversation, because there's such
Mm-hmm.
a sort of a movement toward
Mm-hmm.
finding a group of people who agree, right? And that
Yeah.
there's safety in that. And I think in some
Mm-hmm.
ways that's in our DNA when we were living
Yeah.
in caves, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
needed to have a group of people to protect us. But how do we live in this broad queer community where not always are differences of points of view celebrated or acknowledged, right? And so
True. True.
what do we
Yeah.
do with that? Or how would you help a client walk through that? Or how have you done that in your own journey?
Yeah. That's a good point where we have differences of opinion and we still are looking for our in group. What I found, I don't know. I guess from my own experience, I found that like most of the time in the queer spaces that I'm going into, most folks take like, and most of the folks are also more politically aligned. They are also taking a more anti-racist approach to life, and so my experience has been that most of the time within queer community is where I find folks that I have similar interests or similar, like less differences in opinion. For clients, though, I think what I end up trying to do is like, okay, can we make space for the mixed emotions that they're feeling, and what are your emotions really trying to tell you right now? If like I have maybe a lot of disagreement with someone or frustration, that it's okay to lean in and say, no, my frustration lets me know I don't want to keep engaging with this person. And
Mm.
so that's actually okay to say this is not the person that I maybe want in my circle, or maybe I want them in maybe the frustration lets us know about how far I want that boundary between me and them. And so maybe they don't get close to the chest, but then I can kind of keep them at a distance, at when we see each other at work, or maybe I keep them at a distance and we see each other at queer events. But I think being able to honor those mixed emotions that come along with our community around us.
I love that you're pointing to the ability, because it's kind of coming back to what you were saying around self-awareness. It's awareness of what my emotions are wanting to tell me. I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, many of us, just humans in general, but maybe queer folks more so, have been taught that there's something wrong with what we're feeling. And that program
Yeah.
brought so early, like don't feel,
Yeah.
here's a piece of candy, go to your room, all the things
Yeah.
that we do to not feel.
Mm-hmm.
So for someone to start to thaw out enough to ask ourselves, what am I actually feeling? And how
Yep.
do I not look at emotions through the lens of good emotions or bad emotions, but they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
tell me something? And to be able
Mm-hmm.
to be curious about that as a guide, I think that's really brilliant, Lamarre, because that really helps us get in touch with what you're pointing to throughout this conversation, what's true for me. It's
Yes.
easy to jump onto like a group or an identity or what should I be thinking or feeling, but to be able to
Mm-hmm.
ask ourselves, it's the road less traveled in so many ways.
Definitely, definitely, yeah. I agree with that wholly, and I'm glad that we're even able to have this conversation today to to make space and also honor the queer experience and highlight for people who might even be questioning or folks that um, don't know how to even have these conversations. That these are some of the questions to even ask. This is the way that you bring it up in community, and um, that it really starts from within as well. Like it's both at the same time. It's surrounding yourself with people that are going to allow you to have these questions, and also be able to be honest with yourself around like, hey, why am I even feeling this way, and what is it that I'm feeling?
Yeah. So many of us, myself included, I buried my emotions so much. And when I think about the queer experience, and of course, there's not one, queer experience. So I'll say my
Yeah.
queer experience was at a very early age, and obviously I'm from an older generation, right? But from a very early age, I had to pretend to be someone who I wasn't. And
Mm.
that strategy saved my
Mm-hmm.
life in some ways. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember my therapist said to me at one point, what was it like being attracted to the very guys who were calling you the F word every day?
Mm,
And there's so much trauma there that I hadn't yet unpacked because I just
yeah.
like I'm good. And Lamar, my strategy was to be rebellious. And this was a
Okay.
long time ago, so I was kind of out and proud. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, doing some of the deeper work, I was like, oh, I thought that sort of like, yeah, I'm big and gay and look at me and I'm proud was actually
Yes.
feeling that, but I discovered
Mm-hmm.
it was actually masking it.
Got you. That there were all these like maybe hurt or maybe like really like betrayed or disappointed emotions that were underneath and that were being masked by the rebellion.
That's right.
Got you.
And
Yeah.
the deeper work for me was really looking at what I absorbed and decided about myself and
Yeah.
feeling so broken. And that became,
Mm-hmm.
instead of this curious, young, happy child becoming the basic operating system, it was this broken, not good enough, I can't be me that became the operating system.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack over the years for me.
Definitely. Dang. I appreciate you sharing that. Just kind of like really highlight that sometimes the perspective, or maybe even like the narrative that we give to maybe our behaviors, that can change over time. And when we are able to like really take an honest look at it, then we can see, oh, this is what was underneath. And I hadn't known this is what I was covering it up with, you know? I find for myself, I don't know. I feel like I know for some folks, they mention their queer experience has like knowing from when they were a kid, that they were queer. I feel like for me that didn't happen so much so until like later on in like early adulthood, earlier like yeah. So like a couple years ago is where I really started leaning into it and trying to find. I'm still learning, of course. I'm still on this journey right now, but I think the main thing from my experience has been really questioning more so like how do I want to show up in spaces? Do I need to take on this like hyper masculine bravado and carry myself in a way where people like, they see me as a cis man and don't question my sexuality? Or do I want to allow myself to be fluid in the way I like move, dance, even interact with people to where it feels comfortable for me? So that's been my experience lately of like, how do I want to show up in spaces and like being allowing myself to also like notice what am I really attracted to? Is it the core person? What are the physical presentations that I'm attracted to? All of these different things. Like I think I'm in that journey, that period right now, which helps me out with clients. So being able to like, depending on like what stage clients are in their queer exploration, but like for folks that are earlier on, I'm like, oh, okay, you're in this early part. I understand that. And then this middle part, I don't know if it's a middle, still more to see, but
I love it.
mm,
And as you're talking, I was also just imagining what comes up for me when I even
mm,
ask these questions, right? Because
yeah.
in some ways it's easier just to like jump onto some kind of role, right? So, and within our community, there's so much support for that, right? Like I'm a mask person or
Mm-hmm.
and like we end up in all these different little subgroups, right?
Yes,
And yet, like what's true for me could be different next week, or what's true for
definitely.
me might be more about what risk am I willing to take today? And
Yeah.
I remember thinking early on, like and there's a global we there, but I'm going to speak with a lot of gay men I know in particular. There was like a hyper sexualizing masculine men and
Mm-hmm.
shaming more effeminate men, right? And now, obviously, that's evolved over time. And
Yes.
we're exploring this more deeply now, but that's a dynamic that I see show up.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought in that last point around risk, right? And how much risk am I willing to take? Because I think it also that speaks to showing up authentically in regards to, are you safe? Are you in a space where you're safe enough to do that? And a lot of people are still not able to do that. Like a lot of a lot of non-binary or even trans folks, it's hard for them to show up in spaces where they can feel safe to really be their full self. And I think that's also something I try to talk about with clients too. And that's part of offering gender affirming therapy and offering gender affirming care, where we acknowledge like, okay, but let's make sure you're safe and not putting yourself at maybe so much risk, not in a way that it's shunning, but it's like, can we make sure there's a community space or there's spaces where we know for sure you'll be safer, you know?
That's right. And
Yeah.
to also know that our expression is going to change over time and
Yeah.
nothing and talk about non-binary. I don't have to be bound to what how I feel today. Like I
Yes.
grow and explore, more things will emerge that help me to understand my own values that you spoke to. I want to switch
Yeah.
a little bit. We're kind of moving toward the end of the conversation, believe it or not, but I want to,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're willing to share what was or what is the call for you in doing your work. I have a sense there's a connection with what we've been talking about, but I am curious about that. Why
Yeah.
is your why for this work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I like that one. And I get that question from clients sometimes too, which is kind of nice. For me, I had good positive experiences with therapy when I was in high school,
Mhm.
coming from a Haitian family where things aren't mental health isn't really talked about, and like it's not that there wasn't space for conversations, but it was maybe not much of a model to say like how you have these like healthy communication around emotions. And I know for myself, I maybe like I definitely didn't feel like it was okay to bring up some of the things like, oh, I feel sad or I feel depressed. And it's like, well, why are you depressed? Life is fine. Like,
Mm,
you just had a full plate of food yesterday. I'm like,
right.
yeah, but there's more there. And so it was having a positive experience with therapy in high school that led me to going into undergrad and wanting to research psychology particularly, and I thought about being a clinical psychologist, to be a figure in the Black community and also Haitian community that mental health does offer a benefit, that it doesn't have to look like this one size fits all model where you're divulging your secrets, but that you can open up and find people that look like you where you feel comfortable to talk. So that's where I originally kind of started, and then over time I've gotten to a place of it's also it's the natural progression of like getting further into the field and getting to this work, but learning like there's so much relational and attachment wounds and history that can be unpacked and worked through, that that's really what keeps me going, is that being able to have a corrective emotional experience with clients, where they're coming to someone that's not shaming them and wants to make space for all of their emotions. I've had a lot of people let me know, like, just from the initial conversation and interaction, that it's like, wow, I feel really comfortable here. And that keeps me going to kind of like want to offer that to people. Of course, there's more, modalities and interventions that you can throw into the mix, but at the core, it's that relational experience that the therapist has with their client. And then to even model that, hey, what's happening here? How can you replicate that elsewhere in other places? Um, yeah,
I love
that's
that. And
where, yeah.
that's really the root of my work too, is like that human connection.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think a lot of times in our sort of our field of therapy and recovery, we spend so much time on, like you said, the modalities and the interventions. They're all important. And yet the thing that really heals, like you mentioned, the attachment wounds, is really
Hmm.
creating true safety, which is not in a place where we're not going to disagree, but a place where we're bonding at a very deep level. And I'm
Yes.
seeing some potential within you that maybe you don't have access to yet. So I think I love
Yes.
that. And in a moment, I'm going to
Hmm.
ask you to do, if you have some closing thoughts. But before that,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you. I feel like we just got started. There's
Yeah, I know.
so many conversations to be had.
Yep.
I'm very curious to learn more about your work. But
Hmm.
do you have closing thoughts for anyone watching or
Um,
listening?
Closing thoughts are some questions. What's it look like to be honest with yourself?
Mm,
Um, what is the most compassionate act that you can offer yourself today? And being able to find your community is something that I would say. Finding your community, finding your people, folks that really accept you for who you are. Those are things that I wish for everyone. Still working for myself, of making sure that I wonder those questions day to day, and then making sure I'm relying on community when they do show up for me. And yeah, I'm grateful today for TJ, you having me on the show so that I could at least like share my thoughts, share my experience. I'm always open to working with more clients if they ever want to connect with me. I'm part of a diaspora therapy group, is a private practice that I work at, group private practice that I work at, and so you can always get connected with me through there or even on Instagram, any other platforms as well.
Amazing. Wow. I just
Yeah.
want to say thank you. Those questions that you asked, I want to invite anyone who's listening or watching, maybe write those questions down, go back, just rewind, get those questions. They're so powerful. I'm a big
Hmm.
proponent of living in a question. So you might take one of those questions and just ponder it for the next 24
Hmm.
hours and see what shows up. Because
Yeah.
life guided by that inner wisdom and self-awareness is a completely different way of being. So
Hmm.
thank you for demonstrating that. Thank you for the work you do. And of course, as I said, your full bio will be in the show notes. So anyone wants to connect with Lamarre, you'll have the ability to do that. And so what I always like to close with is gratitude. So gratitude to
Hmm.
you, Lamarre, for the work that you do and for your yes, it's so important. And also
Thank you.
for anyone watching, if this has spoken to you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share. I know that is said in almost every podcast, but it really does make a difference. Not because we're going
Yeah.
to get more views, even though we like views. It's really because this conversation, and Lamarre, you said it, like it's important that we have these conversations. So
Hmm. Yeah.
thank you, everyone. Until the next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.